What's up, everybody? Happy Friday. It is another week with Ivy Nicole, y'all. And this is She Evolves. I want to make sure y'all tap in with me. Go to sheevolvesllc.com and make sure that you follow me across all social media platforms. I am live right now on Facebook, Ivy Nicole, Facebook, Miss Nikki, Facebook, the Pink District. I'm live on Twitter. And where else am I live? YouTube. Yeah, y'all. I'm live on YouTube too. I always forget to say that. So make sure y'all type in, follow me. If y'all can't remember all of that, just go to sheevolvesllc.com. Or if you can't remember that, it is just my name, ivynicole.com, y'all. But don't forget the H. It's Nichole. So y'all know this is She Evolves. So it's all about the evolution of a woman, and that is what we're talking about today. We are talking about what is the importance of women history. I know this is not March anymore, so we're not really tapped into Women History Month, but I don't think this conversation should ever end. This is all about women history, women survival, liberation amongst women, all of the above, all that you can think of. So today I have a very, very, very lovely special guest, Dr. Sananda. Yes, I said doctor, right? So get it
Yeah.
right, y'all. Put some respect on her name. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ivy. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to work with you before. I've seen you organize all kinds of platforms for women's issues, women's health, the right to our bodies. It's a real pleasure to see the work that you're doing around the city. I applaud you completely. Beautiful
Thank
woman you are.
Thank you. I want to be like you when I grow up.
you know, I never felt like I grew up. I just feel like my hair is graying a bit and my kids are getting bigger, but I still feel as anxious as I was when I was 16. And I
Okay,
think
but you're only 18, so.
girl, I'm almost 50.
Girl, bye. So it is a common rule that when you come onto my show, we get all into your business. Who is Dr. Sananda? Let's hear it. Who are you?
Well, I'm trained as an anthropologist. I graduated from Columbia University. I was an adjunct professor at Wayne County Community College. I moved out to Grand Rapids. In between, I've done a bunch of little things. I was a chair of the education committee for Highland Park Chamber of Commerce. I was also on the board for Refuge for Nations, which is about women creating and cultivating their own spaces of business at home, specifically immigrant women who don't have those language skills but have every other skill they need. Oh my gosh, I've been teaching dance for over 35 years. I'm part of Hindu Temple Rhythms. I'm their senior most dancer. I was, wow, yeah, I was the main dancer for Nayakas out in New York. There's just so much by the time a woman gets to my age.
So wait, I want to back up because I'm gonna check you right quick, right? You said, "Oh, I just did a little bit." This is what I love about you, and other guests that I've had. The humility is just like, wow. You say stuff like, "I just went to the store."
Well, it's like things come to us and we receive. And it's never something that we were looking for to do. These kind of different responsibilities we take on is nothing something that we were looking for, but something we're always willing to do because there's just so much love we receive, and being part of
Mhm.
something greater. So in that sense, it's gorgeous to be alive. It's gorgeous to be here. I'm learning about Grand Rapids. I'm learning more about the kind of history between Detroit and Grand Rapids, because we talk about Detroit and Lansing and a black and white politic, but oftentimes people forget that Grand Rapids is the second biggest city and it's growing. And I want
Mhm.
our listeners and our viewers to remember Detroit is shrinking. They want it to be 650 to 600,000. I predict in like the next 10, 20 years, 15, 20 years, Grand Rapids is going to be bigger than Detroit. So we got to go beyond the politics of Republicans and Democrats and the politics of black and white, all of those ways that we kind of divide ourselves, and look at how and who is investing in Detroit or disinvesting in it. And that's been the biggest, I guess, pull in terms of my career outside of my career. Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about the evolution of women, whether we talk about biologically or in terms of our own consciousness as we get older through our life stages. It's just really, really rich stuff to talk about. There's never enough. There are never enough episodes. And just like there are infinite history books, infinite times too for women.
Let's talk about your career as an anthropologist. Why did you decide to go into anthropology? Like, that's just so unique and intriguing.
Wow. I haven't thought about that for years, but I didn't want to do psychology. And I didn't want to do sociology. What I liked about anthropology is at the time, it was the 80s. It was Metro Detroit area. I was like the only Indian student in my elementary school in Troy that time. If anybody knows about the city of Troy, it's like 30% Asian now. But at that time, it was swampland. I was the only Asian. And there was a lot of things going on in my life, a lot of issues in the home. And at school, they kind of just made everything cultural. Like anything different about me was cultural. And I'm like, well, that's not like a proper standard, you know? So I wanted to delve into anthropology when I got to college. First, I thought law school, right? I thought I wanted to change the world through law. But then what I decided is I wanted to understand the beauty of the world through anthropology. And people really don't realize how rigorous anthropology is. It's not just about food and clothing and people and their languages. It's way more involved than that. It's about the evolution of culture itself. And therefore, the definitions that we put on ourselves, the definitions we put on each other, how power works in terms of how our identities are constructed. And I kind of wanted to follow those parameters because I wanted to thrive individually as well as in my career. And so everything I read, everything I studied, it seemed to relate to me in so many different ways. I wasn't studying other people because when you study anthropology and you study all these different cultures, the reason we're studying all these other people is to have a better understanding of ourselves in our own culture. So it's a comparative method. It's not just simply like going to a hoedown or going to a concert or just trying to figure out how people are different. Anthropology is about the unifying aspect of what we all are. The diversity is cool, but we're all human. Now, remember, in terms of chimpanzees, we're only 98 to 99% similar in DNA, right? So in terms of humans, we're even more similar. And in terms of people, men and women, we're the same. But not
Wow.
but not
See,
culture.
that's a whole nother show. That's gonna be a part two for real.
Yeah. They call
Um,
it sexual dimorphism. For every species, there's a male and female form.
okay.
Without either form, there would be no species. So each species, I mean, in terms of those that are male and female, right?
Right.
Same genetics, but it works in different ways. Because there was just studies done on COVID, and they found that women undergoing prenatal care or who lacked prenatal care during COVID, if they were susceptible to infection, their boys were actually vulnerable to a deficiency in IQ, whereas the girls came out fine. So the more we explore not just sexuality, but sex itself, we see that genetics plays a big part in our development.
Wow. So I guess this is like a perfect segue into the actual topic with the evolution of a woman.
Mm.
You know why? Because for me, women history is very, very important. Going all the way back to the 19th Amendment getting ratified in 1920. That was a very important piece of history because that was the jumpstart of women's rights. That's where feminism really kicked off.
It did. And a lot of it was because, remember, it was during like the whole idea of prohibition. And they put in the Prohibition Amendment before women actually got the right to vote. And the
Mm-hmm.
Prohibition Amendment, as much as they put it on film and put it in documentaries as about something that happened through women, what really happened through women was the advent of social work. And I know you're studying in social work. Without women, without their voluntary organizing, without putting out their intellect and putting their domestic bodies into the public, we would not have social work today. So when women could not vote, they decided to change society anyway. And prohibition is just one of those aspects. Now, remember, prohibition came before we had the right to vote. And a lot of history books say that it is women who pushed the prohibition thing, and that's how it passed. So if we didn't have the right to vote, but we got an amendment in, I think that's pretty significant to saying what 52% of the population in America can do.
Well, like that's very interesting, that you bring like the whole history piece because a lot of times, women today, my generation, the generation after me,
Yeah.
they don't really care about the history, the evolution of how, the diva pretty much evolved, right? Because we was not always like this.
The diva is a lot about performativity. It's about crossing taboos into enjoying our sexuality. Oftentimes we're labeled as salacious or lascivious for wanting to be sexy, but the diva is that safe space of being able to perform as an artist, right? And to be able to, not just for gentlemen's clubs, right? But the
Right.
diva is a public art form of performing the true power. And when I say true, what I mean is all those expectations about being sexy and being beautiful, but then at the same time not being allowed, right, to explore it because you're not a good girl if you want to explore all of that because that's something that tempts men. Being a diva kind of elevates, right? It's not that you're trying to tempt men, you just are. It's almost like a goddess status in a sense, which is very interesting in a patriarchal society.
Yeah, so today, like it seems as though the roles has switched.
Oh,
The roles has reversed. Misogyny is at its best.
mm.
We do know that. We see it in the media, we see it in our everyday life, we see it at work, we see it at the gas station, we see it shopping at Walmart, the grocery store, we see it everywhere. We live in a misogynistic world,
Oh,
but
yeah.
again, like I stated, it appears as though like we have just like we flipped the switch. And
Well,
women are so powerful now, but yet I see now the soft era is coming back. Like, women are saying, I don't want to be the strong, independent woman anymore. I'm not built for that. Um, it's all about the soft life. What are your thoughts on that?
wow, you brought up so many things at the same time. So I'm just gonna like scurry around in my brain and hopefully answer your question. Pre-COVID era, after the housing recession and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
women were actually more employed than men. Women get more college degrees than men. But
Mm-hmm.
here's a caveat to all of this liberation and independence, because I call it kind of like the new triangle trade, especially of women of color. Um, you get that college degree and you're paid less than men, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're always shuffling between family court that doesn't give us the right parameters to protect our children in a sense, right? And we'll get into that because that's a class issue too. You go to Oakland County, family court works one way. You go to Wayne County, family court works another way. But
Mm-hmm.
in either case, when it comes to people of color, family court is about dividing men and women. And I think that that is what this younger generation is coming into. They talk a lot more about interdependence because in the 1960s, they used to say the black man was an endangered species. And then in the 1980s, Oprah was like, where's all the good black men? It's like, you can look in jail and find them. You know what I mean? Plenty of
Mm-hmm.
good black men in jail for no damn reason. That this idea of being independent is great. It doesn't work with raising kids, because this is talking about the breakdown of the family. And when the family breaks down, the value of a woman's heart, her work, and her labor break down too. I'm not just talking about man and wife. I'm talking about your mother, your mother-in-law, your
Mm-hmm.
sisters-in-law, your brothers-in-law, your cousins. After the housing recession, a lot of Detroiters lost their homes. And I noticed in the classroom that people weren't coming in every summer wearing that t-shirt, right? Because people make up their own t-shirts about their family reunions, when a lot of these grandmothers and mothers lost their homes. Because remember,
Yeah.
Detroit, as a first world nation, probably had the most female-headed households owning homes, which is why I think we became so vulnerable as well, right? And so women do a lot, not just to organize out politically, but to organize the family. And so before COVID, women had more jobs than men. Women were more employed than men. Women were getting more degrees than men. But what I'm always afraid of is that women become a fiscal conduit for other agendas, because we're not getting paid as much. We're not getting as acknowledged as much. And if you look at it this way, I don't know if it was in the New Yorker or something, but say your husband's a pediatrician, you're a pediatrician, you're getting paid 60% of what your husband gets paid after working 20, 30 years. Now, say you're a banker. Remember, Mrs. Obama came from Harvard, right? Say you're a
Mm-hmm.
Harvard banker. After 20, 30 years, you're getting paid 20% of what male bankers and the same hierarchy make. So, yeah, we're out there, we're doing things, we're negotiating stuff, we're writing political satires, political responses, we're the face of change. But when it comes to the face of power, we still don't exist.
Oh.
Because
Oh.
banking. And then how about those military contracts, folks? How many women are involved in that stuff? How many women are involved in the business of war? Because that's good business.
Oh
I
my
don't advocate
God.
for war, by the way.
Wow. Like you just said a whole lot, but what like really stood out is we are not in power. Even
Exactly.
though we're out here making these boss moves,
Yeah,
we're
we're making
still not
diva
in
boss
power.
moves. We're making diva boss moves. We're on television. We're in the media. Um, and, and a lot of stuff is happening. But the idea the family is breaking apart, which is one thing to talk about. But the other thing to talk about is what is money, what is wealth, how it's
Hmm.
generated, and how much we're part of it. How many women do we know? I don't know
Hmm.
any female bankers personally. I can Google them. You know
Okay.
what I mean? But
Right.
it would be nice to have a female network that has to do with small businesses. Because remember, during COVID, a lot of small businesses fell apart. That's also very female driven, right? And so, as much as we're allowed to kind of parade around the economy, parade in social media, we're still not pulling the strings of power. And so, look at it this way too: two people graduate from Harvard. The husband's going to run for senator. What does the wife do? She has to become his first lady, right? Joe Biden and Dr. Jill Biden.
Right. Because, oftentimes you even forget that she's a doctor.
Indeed. Indeed. And if we don't play that supportive elemental role, men don't rise in politics. So when we talk about men rising in politics, we're really talking about families that are intact. And so why are women who are so educated holding back? Because this has to do with the strings of power.
So what's the solution to that? Like how do we like really boss up and tap into the power that we already have? Because we have the power, but we're just not granted the power.
We definitely have a lot of spiritual power. We are the guardians of our young men.
Hmm.
Um, but do we want to support the power structure that is here? That's the main point. If you want to support the power structure that already exists, if we want to succeed under Wall Street, under banking, under all these different conditions, then the way to succeed as a woman is when you get to the top, you know, there's certain kind of subjugations that you got to take. So power and success, right, is a negotiation for women that's a little different than men.
Yeah, because you
Men
know,
become
then you
champions.
get into pretty privilege. What you gonna do for me? How did you get to the top?
But we got to also look at it this other way. We got to look at it because I've been studying racism, however you want to call it, for a long time. And you know, men like it all. Men like every fabric of woman. You know what I'm saying? But it's the women, the matriarchs, who choose what children are acknowledged in the family and not. So even though like we look at power in terms of violence with men, a lot of power has to do with aggregating our own families. If we're denying a child because we don't like the woman, oh, he was just with this woman and blah, blah, blah. This defines a larger paralysis in our ways of thinking because women actually are more territorial than men. And if you look at studies, it also says that Black women are the least likely to marry outside of their culture. Japanese women the most, nuclear bombs, and we could talk about that's like a whole other episode. But there's this media idea that Black women are fun-loving and free and sexy, and that every Black woman is an inner diva. But truth be told, and this was in a couple of different books, Black women are very much loyal to this idea of protecting their Black men. And oftentimes, and this is women of color too, this is ethnic women too, including me, this pivots us, right? Because we got all these ideals, but then when we're mistreated, how do we shake it? Because how successful can you be if you're not really in charge of your personal life?
Yeah, you know, and that's a very good point that you bring up, you know, how Black women, or like you say, women of color in general, are known for just protecting the Black man. But in essence, you know, we turn around and we say, well, what's wrong with you?
We say what's wrong with you, definitely, but where does that conversation go when we don't have the rest of the country supporting us?
Okay.
So how are we able to pass an amendment that made alcohol illegal, but we can't pass anything else that protects us? Look at what's happening with abortion. We're not in charge of our bodies anymore. It's
Yeah,
up
I
to
thought
you
we
to
was
make.
okay. I thought we was okay until they put that mess about the morning after pill. You know, because in Michigan, Prop 3 passed.
You know, in European countries, women have all kinds of restrictions that we're not aware of. In Germany and a lot of different European countries, you have a right to abortion into the first trimester. That's it. And why do you think that is? That's because there's so many Africans and Asians and all these different people moving into Europe. And what they're really worried about is propagating whiteness. And then we kind of fall into it. And we talk about it in terms of independence. But if you're a married couple, you still can't talk it out. It's still not up to the two of you if you're going to have a child. Because the face of it is like, oh, these women, they're out there, they're partying, they're using it like birth control. They're not measuring themselves. They're not taking the appropriate actions, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like a punishment. But the problem is Americans, like in European countries, it became a little expensive, a lot more expensive for us to raise our kids. So how could it be that every social security number that's born in the United States raises the equity of the United States, but puts us women in debt?
How does that put us women in debt?
Well, I'm worried about my kids' college. I don't know I'm going to pay for it yet. I think I'm a career woman. I'm trying to figure it out, but it's all finagling. On top of which, over 60% of people drop out of college by sophomore year.
Mm.
So you put all that together, debt is the biggest problem, especially for women of color. And if you look at student loans, women of color carry a lot of it, a lot of it, you know. So we're out there, we're working, we're doing all these things, but most of the money's going to bills. Definitely um, a greater quality of living in a sense, but the money's all going to bills and it's all going to interest payments. How do we negotiate that with all this social freedom that we have? Because financially, we're pretty bound.
You know, like I'm just like really thinking about that. You know, like you drop out by your sophomore year, and if you do make it out, w- you spend how many of thousands of dollars to get a degree, and then you graduate, and then how much do you make?
like I said,
Yeah.
the more important the job, the less money women make. The less important the job, the more money women make. So, like, if you're on the shop floor at Ford, you're making same amount. You got unions. But when you get into those upper echelons, those tiers, where I think Obama passed a law, like when he was president years ago, that it's okay for people to talk about how much they make. For the longest time, it was illegal for you and your coworker, if you were on those higher steps, right,
Hmm.
to talk about your contract or how much you made.
So why is that? Why was it illegal? You think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
I think
Um,
everything should be transparent.
okay.
I think everything should be transparent. And when we say that, it goes from the political, where we want everything transparent, to the personal, um, where we don't want things to be transparent. We don't want to talk about times where we were abused or misunderstood, because if we share those experiences, it weakens us. And so it's people talk about a people's history and they talk about a women's history. Why isn't it the same? Because if you're not rich, you were always working as a mother. You weren't at home. You were always out there working. A lot of the women that they grabbed from Africa and put them into the slave trade, some of them were like hundreds of miles away from home because they were coming to market. They were entrepreneurs. So
Yeah.
women were always out there, women were always working, women were always the foundation of production. But where did this yoke come from? Part of it we could say family and law, but part of it we could say is the consumer culture. Wanting to look good, wanting to feel good, wanting to be out there. And when we have that image, and we put it on Facebook, we're doing this, we're doing that. How much of the backstory isn't there? How much of the support isn't there? How much of the mother-daughter relationship is broken down over generations of lack of support?
Yeah, I want to kind of back up a little bit, because it triggered something. What you just said, it triggered something that you said earlier.
Hmm.
Just in regards to how society excels, just kind of separates the home, right? Divides the family. It makes me think, what was it, the 60s? Don't
Yeah,
quote me. I don't Was it the 60s when, in order for a woman to get any type of welfare or anything, the father of her child could not be present
that's
in the
right.
home. And I think that was, the beginning of what they would call the welfare queen.
Well, what's interesting is that until the 60s, they've been sending so many people off to war that they left people as widows, right? A lot of women as widows.
Yeah.
They didn't have the proper support. And so they needed to, because it all used to come from, a lot of it used to come from the army kind of stuff, the support for women. But what people don't talk about as much nowadays is the Moynihan Report. And the Moynihan Report, I believe, was published in 1967. And they call it the Moynihan Report because the actual title is The Problem with the Negro Family. So they put all the poverty that women were going through across the nation under the mask of Black women, right? And it goes into 5 chapters. And so the first chapter is an apology for slavery and how it broke down the family, blah, blah, blah. But then as you
Hmm.
read through it, what the Moynihan Report is talking about is that, oh, now these Black women have found their freedom from marriage, they can't be tamed. And because they can't be tamed, they're becoming the residual pools for criminality because they're giving birth to all these boys who don't have fathers, and therefore they're turning to crime. And you remember we had the rebellion and all of that at the same time that the Moynihan Report was published. The crime bill that Biden helped pass, and Kamala, because she's a Caribbean Indian too. We got to remember that people aren't just one face. The crime bill is based on the Moynihan Report, and they blamed Black women for criminality, not poverty. In fact, women are blamed for poverty when it's exactly the opposite problem.
Wow. So, then, you fast forward and you get into the school system. I forget who wrote the book, but it's the criminalization of Black girls in the school system, and how, Black girls are often um, sexualized,
Absolutely sexualized.
adultification, criminalized, and then you go into the school to prison pipeline.
Oh yeah.
And here the juvenile system is
And we're
created,
not,
and babies are having babies.
and we haven't even started talking about trafficking.
Mm-mm.
You know, um, wow, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. I think it was only like 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, that they decided if you're 16 and under, you're not going to be prosecuted as a prostitute. I'm like, where did the light bulb go off for that? Everybody knows about the pimp hoe mentality. People have been writing about it a long time. Some people annex it to this idea of family, but really it's just looking for someone to love and value you. And as much as we say Black is beautiful, we don't see it in society. We don't see it. There's so many girls who will give it up for a meal from McDonald's. That's the truth. And Michigan is one of the most trafficked spots for women. Ann Arbor was one of them, but Detroit is definitely one of them. And nobody seems to see it because even if you look at studies done in medicine, right, where there was this Black doctor who went in from pains and they wouldn't give her any pain meds. I mean, so much of the Black woman's experience is just put off like, oh, and it's because of this whole diva mentality that they have too. It's like, oh, she's flourishing, she's just dramatic. You know what I mean? Or they're looking at a little 9, 10, 11-year-old Black girl's precocious because she got rhythm. If you got rhythm, you're sexual. You know what I mean? You're precocious. You know things. And a lot of social workers are coming in with this framework that Black girls are just more mature. Children are children are children are children. Nobody's more mature. Is what you've been exposed to and how it shapes you. And so instead of looking at the sociological aspect of the danger, right, of the way girls encounter boys, because when you're looking at poverty, whether it's Black or white, whether it's the farm or the city, they're girls' bodies and boys' bodies. And boys' bodies are used to maintain boundaries through violence, and girls' bodies are used to get money.
Man, you just said so much, and you're absolutely right, because this is the premise of how our society is looked upon. It's crazy. It baffles me just to even think about it was up until what, 1970, that women could legally go into a bank and open up a bank account. That wasn't that long ago. So I need to either have my daddy's permission or my husband's permission if I'm married to get a bank account.
That was for credibility. But then as marriage fell apart, they started having women do their own thing. I'll give you an example from Africa. This is from the 90s to 2000. I had some friends, they had capital, they were in New York, and they wanted to help African women, right? And so it was this micro lending thing that was going on. They're like, okay, we'll give out loans for women to get sewing machines. And think of sewing machines, they could be entrepreneurs, they could create products, they could sell them to tourists, and then they can become independent. But if we can't procreate, we go extinct, right? Just the biological view of it. So take it 5 to 10 years later, Tommy Hilfiger, right? And all these
Mhm.
other big companies start coming out to Africa and hiring these women because there's no overhead, while these women are paying off the loans for their sewing machines. So capital isn't the way. The real way to assert the value of women is our dignity, and we're always going to have to make money. Before I had my kids, I could have eaten popcorn or mud. I wouldn't care about anybody. But after I had my kids, it's like, and they're both boys. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're going to do everything, hopefully, to help advance your kids, and in that sense, the woman takes a back seat to her own life at that stage of and people don't seem to see that kind of sacrifice that women make, because to women it's not a sacrifice, it's simply called maternal love. But maternal love has a huge economic impact for everybody.
So when you say, women, we take a step back, I experienced this just like in the whole social work game. A lot of women, once they have kids, they're married. They're just like, I don't even know who I am outside of my kids. If I ask a patient or a client, like, who are you? They tell me everything about their husband, their kids, their
Right.
family, the dog, the fish. But you typically lose sense of self.
That's true, because there's no measure of sense of self through the labor of love. We don't take the labor of love as a measurement. We take it as, what is your successes? How do you look out there? How can you identify yourself apart from your domestic work? And I think that becomes part of the problem, because the domestic work is what fuels all of society, and yet is denigrated. The love we give our children is priceless. Is priceless. Getting them through school, getting them through whatever they need to get through to become men and women, that's priceless. That's something the government can't put a tag on. But the labor of love is something that's not really talked about or thought about. There were gosh, I'm forgetting names right now because we're on. But it's not Kamarov. Amazing anthropologist. Anybody who's seeing it, who's an anthropologist, will know who I'm talking about. But she did a study of women in high infant mortality rates, right? In countries that experience high infant mortality rates, because the idea was that maternal love is natural. And what they found is, like, in places where children die pretty quickly, there's very little attachment to children, right? Because you don't know if it's going to survive or die. Maybe you're on your 8th or 9th child on that sense, which takes away from you biologically in terms of like your vigor and your health and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the labor of love is something that nobody really talks about, that nobody really cares about. It's like, what can you exert in the economy to prove that you're a somebody? Not the fact that you're actually making people.
Wow, like I didn't really like even think about it like that. Like you're making people.
Yeah. And there was an ethnography on
Yeah.
shopping, and it was looking at women going through shopping, and why does it take us so long? Even me, like, why does it take us so? I know what this kid likes. I know what that kid likes. I know what my brother likes, what my husband likes, what my mother likes, what my father likes. I know all their tastes. And advertising, I'd be worth $1,000,000, because I know what each and every individual wants to be satisfied and happy. And so when we talk about, oh, like, I cooked, I cleaned my cat, a lot of women don't leave domestic violent relationships because they're afraid for their pets. That amount of empathy and compassion is seen as a weakness, not a strength. But without empathy and compassion, we'd just be killing our neighbors all day. Empathy and compassion have no dollar value. And so all the labor we do is for free.
It's a
But we're
term
not
for that.
free.
I forgot what that was. It's a term for that, and I forget what that term means. I forgot. I just went over it, just
I know
studied
what
it.
you
I forgot.
yeah.
And I know as soon as we get off live, I'm gonna remember what that is.
And then we'll
But
talk.
it's a name for that. Um, just
Think of
how,
all the mammies.
yeah,
Who are the real mothers?
the mammies.
Yeah, they breastfed. They breastfed kids, black, white, whatever. And they loved them. And nobody can wrap their heads around it. How can you be subjugated? How can you be enslaved and learn to love this child while his father's raping you? That's a capacity that's beyond the economy. That's a capacity towards healing. And that's a big part of bringing our identities back. But as long as society tells us that all of this that we do, all this mental hard work, all of this suffering is worth nothing, they just want us to be other men. But if you turn women into men, we have a big problem. Men are great. You know what I'm saying?
But they don't want us to turn into men.
No, they do want us to turn into men in the sense that, well, let me say it's like a psychological thing. They tell us we're worthless as long as we're not like men. Like, take Beyonce, case in point. People love her. Oh my God, my classes love her, love her, love her, love her. But you go through her albums, right? You go through those titles. You see how she becomes another Jackie O. She goes from bondage to lemonade. What you talking about for lemonade? And that album where she's talking about bondage and whips and chains and limousines. I mean, she's talking about being an independent woman, but how can you be independent and married to Jay-Z? You can't. You're corporate. And that's what Simone de Beauvoir talks a lot about in Second Sex, how to understand where this compassion comes from, because all women want power too, not just safety. Women also want power. Women also want to put their wings out and fly. But we live through other people's lives. It's like reading a good book. Women are just able to live through other people's lives through the subjugation. That's where they find their freedom when they don't find it in society. And then we say they're submissive. There's two ways of looking at submission. One is a woman's been broke down. You know what I'm saying? But is Dr. Biden submissive? It's her family that made Joe Biden president, not the other way around. Is Mrs. Clinton submissive? It's her family that made Bill president, not the other way around.
Okay.
When we don't have our families to back us, there's no one to value us, because we are corporate in that sense. We think corporately, not corporately in terms of business, but as being one body.
But it is business.
I'll say family is, a lot of political scientists say this, family is the smallest political unit. So when you break down the family, you break down a woman's political solidarity, where people add value to her life and her labor. And then she has to go out to the market to make it on her own and still supply all of this labor.
That kind of brings me to the next point, this social media trend that has been just going crazy, especially on TikTok. There's so many it's a war on TikTok about whether it should be 50-50 or not, gender roles in a relationship, in a marriage, in a home. Me personally, I don't think that you can have it both ways.
Yeah.
A man can't say, I expect 50-50, but then expect, to be treated like a king when he get home. Because you're going to get 50%. If I'm paying 50%,
you see, we can't ratio what we bring in, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like what's behind the 50-50 thing is I want to be acknowledged. And if
Yeah.
I'm working and you're working, you need to spend more time with the kids too. And I think the men want that too. You see a lot more movement towards paternity leave. Men want to be more involved in their kids' lives after working like 50 years in a company. All they get is this gold watch and they don't know their kids, you know. So love is more than an instinct. Love is an
Mhm.
evolutionary process. Love is what has brought us here to this point today. And it's not, I guess it's not fair for me to have relegated the whole labor of love role to women. Men suffer from not loving. Men don't suffer from being loved. Men suffer from not loving. And there are plenty of men who will tell us that today. And we see this with like the LGBTQ movement. I'm out in Grand Rapids. It's very, very Christian country out here. And they try to relegate these 1950s gender roles like it came from the Bible, but it really came from the 1950s. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Men need to love to learn how to love. And we don't allow men to do that. Not us as women, but us as a society. We don't allow it. For men to be vulnerable, they become effeminate, right? For men to be vulnerable, then they're not strong. They're not the foundation. They're not the protector. So where does that conversation come in that, you know, uh, I'm a woman, but I'm a man too. I'm a man, but I'm a woman too. I want my kids to love me. I want them to have those big saucer eyes when I come home. I don't want to be strained by corporatism because I'm a man. It's like, oh, you're a male, so you can work 10, 12 hours a day. That's not humane. And what it does, it takes the humanity away from men and puts the onus on women to do all that love and caregiving.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look at caregiving, um, there was this interesting, of course, all these studies I can't like just spit out right now because I'm so excited.
I know, right?
But there was a study that showed that if you have someone sick at home, caregivers have a shorter lifespan, a much shortened lifespan than the people they're taking care of because it takes so much away from them. When I look at my college students at Wayne County, it's like you can go to U of M, you can go to MSU. Young men and young women both are saying, but I got an auntie at home. I got a mom at home. I got an uncle at home. I can't leave them and go off to a campus out there somewhere when they need to be taken care of. So when it comes to the rich, it's that. But when it comes to working people and poor people, we see a lot more compassion in men. But then what we see is that men and women are genderized in terms of criminality. And men are looked at upon as harder. I remember when I was working at a high school in New York, I mean, so many boys were selling drugs to get diapers for their mom, for the little brothers and sisters. So
Wow.
many girls were losing credit from the first and second hour in high school because they were walking their little brothers and sisters to school. They were raising. And so caregiving amongst poor people, amongst working class people, I think is a lot more shared. But the media display of it is that men are violent and women are hoes.
Yeah, that's exactly what the media portrays. Social media, the music,
Mm.
um,
It
the
glorifies
movies.
it.
Exactly, like it's glorified. It's just like if you're not an Instagram model, then what are you doing?
And there's a problem when you're talking a young, handsome, intelligent black man and he doesn't think he's going to live till 25. Where's that fatalism coming from? And if you don't think you're going to live until you're 25, what are you going to do? What are you going to go for? A
Mm.
lot of our young men don't think they're going to live that long. They feel a death sentence over their head, either that or incarceration. And so how's that going to change your motivation and what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, so when you said earlier, men get their strength from loving. What about the whole idea and the aspect of being loved?
You can receive love, but it's like so say like my grandmother came from India, right? and she's
Mhm.
sitting in front of a soap opera every day, watching these English soap operas. She never learns to speak English unless somebody speaks to her. You understand what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
men can receive love, but unless they give love, they don't learn to love.
Okay.
And so if you have all these constraints on them, number one constraint is like your lifespan. I don't know if this is still true, but for the longest time this was true. Into the 90s, maybe 2000. The audience is going to have to fact check on this for me, but the average age to receive Social Security is more than the average age of a Black man. In fact, if you look at power, it's from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? I mean, where are
Yeah.
those men? I had a student who told me like that there are like no older men in her neighborhood. Where are they? They're dead. So if there are no older men raising the younger men, what happens? Just like if a daughter didn't have a mother, what happens on a reflection of self? There's a whole generation of older Black men who would have been so powerful, so suitable, just been eradicated. And then you look at our champions, like, and I'm going old school, like Medgar and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, dead in their 30s. Man's supposed to be a protector, but if he stands up, he becomes a target.
Damn. Damn.
So then where does the soul go?
So then he doesn't protect.
So how do you learn to love?
Mm.
It's a harsh climate for us. As much as there's media exposure of Black bodies, brown bodies from MTV in the 90s on to now, we're buying all kinds of stylish outfits. We're looking good. We're getting our degrees. But who wants to go home at night? Because that's where it's at. And as old school as it sounds, who wants to go home at night? The hearth is the family. The hearth is the cauldron for all magic of love.
Because
How
it
many people
doesn't
have family dinners
exist.
anymore? Even middle class people don't have family dinners anymore. There's so many mothers who told me that their dining room has turned into a homework space.
Mm.
Do you really need that much? I mean, we're all competing in these different hamster wheels, but how much of this competition really is not necessary? Whether it's academics or going out there to be successful. I mean, how much of it is just rigmarole, shit they're putting at us? To be successful is to be acknowledged for your talent. That's not happening.
So what's up with this competition amongst men and women? Because I see that a lot. This is why relationships doesn't exist anymore because of the competition between men and women. Like I said earlier, we're living in a society, we're living in a bad bitch society, right? It's the bad bitch era, and men are looking like, I can't keep up. Or why should I keep up? Why should I bother? Because you can handle it.
Well,
What do you need me for?
this is how patriarchy actually works. Patriarchy isn't for all men. Patriarchy is for the men at top. So if you're working class, if you're poor, if you're middle class, you're constantly having to compete against women to be men. And so look at it this way. You're 16, the boy you got to know is 16, and you got pregnant. They'll help you with your apartment. They'll help you with your education. What they gonna help him with? Because they don't want them to be a family. They don't want them to plan, okay, we're going to take these courses together and we're going to go into real estate. They don't want him to do that. He owes money to the woman, and the state's going to provide for her education. After a while,
Well, then put restrictions saying that he can't be in the home.
Oh yeah, like looking for construction boots and all of that in the old days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, okay, if you need money for your child, what's it got to do with him being there or not? And if anything, isn't it more positive and more affirming that he is? And so it's kind of like, when students write for student loans, right? Um, I did it. I had everything, but I wrote, I'm getting nothing from mom and nothing from dad to max out the money I can get. So when these
Yeah.
single women are writing to the government, they're not saying, his mother provides babysitting, his cousin brought over diapers. And then the statistics are fed back to us that
Mm.
we're single and that we don't live off each other, that we're not interdependent, and that it should all come from the man. But just because there are a lot of Black single women out there doesn't mean that they don't come from family. But what happens is the studies start compiling the responses, right, that we write to
Okay.
protect ourselves, to maximize on our finances. And then we're taught in school that there's no one out there for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Oh
there's a
my
lot of
God. Like you just hit
family.
on so much right now.
There's a
Like
lot of
I'm really trying to unpack all of this. Because men and women are different species. Like what did it say? Women are from Venus, men are from Mars,
there was
right?
a book called that, yeah.
It is a book called that because we are so different, but in today's society, we have women that's really on the rise and really doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, it's almost as if, sometimes we're leaving some of the men behind.
I've got several couples, married couples who are friends of mine, and they're both like medical doctors, right?
Hmm.
And so they're out there making their six figures. You combine their six figures together, maybe they're making seven figures a year, and most of the time the child's with the nanny. So, in fact, I have another friend who's a psychologist in Bloomfield Hills, and she said the kids used to have a bet because they live in these huge mythical houses of like how many days it would go before they saw their parents. So I'm not saying the woman should stay home. That's not what I'm saying at all. But
Hmm.
what I'm saying is the hamster wheel of success is what keeps men and women out of their children's lives, rich or poor. And then where's grandma? Where are the cousins? The whole extended family thing is kind of breaking down. But
Yeah.
you see other cultures coming here and they're building it up. You look at Dearborn, you look at Hamtramck, you look at Dearborn Heights, they got Muslim mayors now, completely family oriented. I'm not going to talk about the pros and cons of being a man or woman, because honestly, there are a lot of professional women in those communities as well. But what is the man and the woman going to say is the value of their family? Because number one, the labor of love just doesn't count. People just don't think it's cool. You know what I mean? Let alone
Okay.
the right raising their kids and knowing them, because it's actually the intimacy of knowing your kids um, that makes them feel valued. That maybe could make this a little better for everybody. Because
So is
how they say women
intimacy
are the
even a
fathers,
thing
men are
now?
the mothers. Say it again.
Is intimacy even a thing now? Does that even exist?
um you got these crazy websites where like you could date and fuck all day. But that's people's wanting to be intimate, because I don't consider that superficial. I don't consider putting your body out there to be a superficial thing, right? Because I'm an anthropologist. Why are so many men and women putting their bodies out there? Why aren't they valuing their bodies? Why is it about and it becomes a performativity? It doesn't matter who's under you,
Yeah.
right? To feel valued. Going to the club, all that is fun. I love doing that stuff. Going to the club looking good. I love all of that. But at the end of the day, if we haven't learned to be cherished, how do we cherish somebody?
Mm. Again, it goes
God's
back to
people.
that learning piece.
We're God's people. We're spiritual people. And when we don't get that spiritual food, we'll look for it somewhere else. And that's just natural. But that's not to say that we don't have it in us. If anything, it shows that we're searching, and we're searching until we find it or until we get hurt.
Yeah. And this is the hamster wheel that you speak about as it pertains to the difference in men and women. And how do we just, learn to be together? Because ultimately, as we look at the hierarchy of needs, Maslow, I mean, he says that we're not supposed to be alone.
Yeah. We're not supposed to be alone, and we're not supposed to just depend on our mom and dad.
Right.
How we're valued comes from the social lens. It comes from our family. It comes from education. It comes from so many different platforms, you know. And so when people are putting up these happy faces and social media images, is because we want to show that we're not hurting, that we're not vulnerable. Well, then the other aspect of it is, how do you learn to explore that vulnerability when it's so made fun of?
But how, so is it real life? Because,
It's all real.
but people do stuff for the gram, you know,
That's real too.
people do stuff for the gram, honestly, but because as we do talk about, the whole superficial aspect of everything, it's a very um crazy coping mechanism that we
Yes,
all
yes,
deal with.
perfect.
It's a facade, like I'm this bad bitch and I don't hurt and I don't cry and I don't do this and I'm guarded and I put up this
Ain't that a man?
wall.
Ain't that a man?
That's a man.
So we just feel more and more alone.
Mm-hmm.
We could have 10 partners, 20 partners, one partner, but we feel more and more alone.
Mm-hmm.
And loneliness is like the most horrific thing a person can go through. What are ghost stories about, right? You're all alone, nobody can see it but you, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
holds you down and does all these things to you, but nobody who you care about around you can see it, right? That's what a lot of those ghost story narratives are. I believe in ghosts, by the way. I'm just a weirdo. But it's this whole idea that you're not attached to something bigger, to something greater, to something spiritual, to something ethereal.
Right.
You're just worth what you are today. You're almost like but it's almost like being in showbiz. You're only as good as your last performance. What the hell is that?
Mm. And oftentimes it is a performance.
All the time. All the time. Sometimes with our husbands and our wives, a lot of times with our kids, it's performance. It's like, you got to do your homework, you got to do this. It's like, I never did stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's like, no, we all have our doubts. We all have our
Mm.
questions, but we're told to perform being a mom, perform being a dad, make sure everything goes a certain way. Now in Detroit, they want to give tickets to parents if their teenagers are out in downtown.
Yes.
What's that?
Because of all of the shootings that occurred, was it last weekend?
And the shootings are coming because parents are allowing their kids downtown. You see what I'm saying? And where's the law going to fall on for that? Is it going to fall on a white kid the same way?
Mm-mm.
They tried to put in a curfew before COVID for kids when they were putting up I was about to say the marshes, right? They were trying to put up this where young kids couldn't come out. But what if you're a kid from Bloomfield Hills? Do they go under the same law?
Of course not.
Right. So as much as these restrictions make sense, they don't. Not if you see how it's applied across various situations, right?
Mm.
Who's going to go out to Bloomfield Hills? Who's going to go out to Royal Oak and give that parent a ticket?
Yeah, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah. And so even though we think it's for our safety, we're further criminalizing the kids when maybe their parents aren't home in the first place? Why don't we have more spaces for kids, period? I'm not saying violence doesn't exist, but violence exists for way more than just bad parenting. And if your kid's out at night, that's not necessarily bad parenting either.
Mm.
I remember going to raves when I was 16, 17. I would come out from the suburbs and we'd go into these abandoned buildings and we'd have the time of our lives. And that's where I got to know Detroit. Where's Detroit going to be now? Where we just keep isolating these kids. If you don't meet people, if you don't know people, how are you going to grow into a different future? The problem with gun violence has nothing to do with kids wanting to see the city in general. You know, if you kept adults at home, there'd be less gun violence, period.
Oh. If you keep adults at home, there would be less gun violence.
A lot less. So why don't we just curfew everybody? Nobody come out after 9. No gun violence. The end. And then on top of that, you've got this facial recognition system, and these AI systems don't work on black and brown faces.
Oh yeah, criminalizing.
And we're just going with it. We're just going with it. Because this little part of our reality has become our universe. But it's not. We're becoming chattel to it. We should be fighting that shit. I'm not saying that we should say, oh, you know, kids should be roaming around. But I mean, what is a kid's situation? Are you going to go who's going to go door to door to find out what a kid's situation is? Maybe it's more unsafe at home.
Now you just said something. You just said like 1,000 words right there. Because that is the ultimate question: is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? You know, you have a child out here stealing from the grocery store. Why?
Not the same as stealing a gold chain.
But why is he stealing a gold chain?
Stealing from the grocery store to me means he needs to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Selling drugs for diapers? Come on now. I'm not saying like, you know, some people like in the 80s and 90s thought they're going to be rappers and all that stuff, but that's because they want to substantiate the hectic dirt of their lives. Because you know how we talk about it as doing dirt.
Yeah.
What do we mean by saying doing dirt? It's to survive. And so how are we going to say that human beings don't instinctually want to survive, don't instinctually want to have those things, to give things to people that they love, to help support people that they love?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we criminalizing people instead of giving them more opportunity? And as we get poorer and poorer, because we had a housing recession, now they're saying domestic American economists are saying we're heading towards another recession. But if you look at international economists, they're saying we're going to go into a depression, which means the whole economy is about to collapse. Look at the way we're talking about China and stuff. We're not talking about anything in realistic views. And this all has to do with keeping a certain patriarchy alive by keeping certain males in power. And when I say males, those males have families behind them. They are not single. Patriarchy is not a bunch of single men running around.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Yeah. They got powerful families. They got cousins in high places. That's patriarchy. Patriarchy is built on family structure. Patriarchy is definitely privilege, but not for like, I'd say 67, 80% of men. And if you look at Detroit's birth rate now, they're saying it's about 85% out of wedlock. In fact, a lot of my the students I used to teach, they're like, why get married now? Because they've been in households that have been so unhappy that they rather try to be friends with each other than get married and hate each other. Because the biggest cause of divorce is poverty. It's lack of money. You got the burning bed situation. You got those extreme cases of abuse. But what's keeping people from coming together is lack of opportunity. It's like you said, can you get welfare if the construction boots are at your house?
Mm-mm.
So if you deny somebody superficially, it does become internalized into how we see each other. Because the male's being rejected anyway. Now on NPR, like maybe seven years ago, this was crazy. They did this kind of comparison of different ethnic backgrounds and different fathers, right? And they wanted to see which father spends the most quality time with his kids. They had a hiccup. They almost threw up. It was Black men who spend the most quality time with their kids, right? Oh, they couldn't figure that out. So then all of a sudden, like other sociologists started calling in. They're like, maybe it has to do with the high unemployment rate. Maybe it's because they're home. This is the first time in my scientific career I've ever heard of a negative, like unemployment rate, being correlated with a positive, like parenting. Maybe it's love. Maybe
Maybe they
Black
care
men
about their
experience the
kids.
same type of vulnerability. You know what I'm saying? But then when we're fed these statistics, when we go to school, we leave that neighborhood, we go to school, we learn these crazy statistics, right? From these crazy studies that don't know anything about our communities. And our young women and our young men are being fed, right? That Black men don't care about their kids. So then what's going to happen if that's already in your head? I'm going to internalize it.
And that is the state of the Black woman.
That is.
The internalized bullshit.
To be
This
independent is to be
generation of
acknowledged.
being fed.
Yeah, because to be independent is to be acknowledged for your worth. If you're not acknowledged for your worth and everything you've done to be the bedrock of the society, you're not independent. You're just waiting tables. Doesn't matter what suit you're wearing, doesn't matter what money you're making. If you come home alone, it's undeserved. We all deserve better. I'm not saying you gotta be with a man or a woman or any of that. We all deserve our family. We all deserve not to be alone.
So intimacy, as you talked about earlier, intimacy and labor of love.
Yes.
Is our takeaway from this show. But unfortunately, we are out of time.
What?
So we got to come back for a part 2. It is a must that we come back for a second round because there's so many things to just unpack, dive into.
We gotta talk
Talk
about pain.
about.
We gotta talk about pain and shame, because that's what rules us.
Yeah.
And
Because we see it now in so many people hurting. And again, the unhealthy coping mechanism, that we all have, the guarded feeling, the narcissistic behaviors.
Yeah.
With the characteristics, rather. Because narcissism is a real mental health condition. But the characteristics or the traits of narcissism.
Yeah. And the enablers.
And the enablers. Yes.
Man, that's gonna be crazy meaty. That's a lot to talk about because there's so much psychic pain that doesn't get unpacked in sociological studies. They're just looking at behavior. They're not really understanding motivation or lack of it.
And why things happen and where did this person come from, the roots of why this person act the way they did. Before I go, I will say this. In social work is what I learned, and maybe I don't know, it was a piece of my anthropology mind just, peeking in and I didn't even know it, but I would often say, and this is when I was working at the girls' home, and some of the workers would say, well, I don't know what her problem is. We gave her a roof over her head and food and blah, blah, blah when she was out on the streets, whatever, right? But the thing is, you don't know what this child grew up in, the environment, right? At 15, 16 years old, this is a long time, right? So it's almost as if, I'm born and raised here, like in Detroit, right? So if someone came to my door at this very moment, kidnap me, right, and fly me over to China, I'm gonna still speak English,
That's right.
right? I'm gonna speak English because this is the language that I know.
And you know, it's nice having a roof over your head and food to eat, but who's loving you in that institution?
But what is love? You know, like again, as I go back to the whole English piece, right? So if I go over to China, I'm going to still speak English. If I'm used to you calling me a bitch for 16 years,
Yeah,
then
that's
this is
right.
the language that I know. This is the mentality that I understand.
And
This
that's the
is the
mentality coming
dynamic.
from the home too. That's the mentality coming from the home too. Look at how ungrateful they are. We're
This
giving
is
cereals.
this is my culture. This is my environment. I'm accustomed to toxic behavior. And just because you take me from one place and put me in another place, the expectations of my behavior changing is slim to none. It's not going to happen.
Especially when we bring in the element of freedom, which is such a weird element to bring in, like talking
Yeah.
about curfew, for instance. Now you have to abide by a bunch of rules to get your food and stuff. And again, it's like, where's that consistency that I'm valued, right?
Hmm.
Because the whole idea is we gave them a roof, we gave them food. Why aren't they grateful? Do I look like a donkey?
Hmm.
I want more than that still. I still
Hmm.
want adventure. I still want love. I still want to feel like I could be powerful someday. Otherwise, what was the point of it all?
Hmm.
And like I said, these young men think they're not going to live long, right?
Yeah.
And Palestine too. These young men know they're not going to live long, so they're like, I'm not just going to go down like a farm animal. I'm going to take somebody with me because nobody wants to be unrecognized. Nobody wants to be just another number. You're killing that identity still. You might give it food, you might give it shelter, and you expect it to say thank you. But who's the person?
Yes. So, Dr. Sananda, so if
Mhm.
people want to get in contact with you, how do they do that?
Samadar Sunanda at gmail.com. SAMADDARSUNANDA at gmail.com. I would love to receive any comments. I would love to receive any critiques. I always want to think better and be a better person.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. Yes.
Oh, thank you,
Thank you
Ivy.
for
I
being
love you to death.
here.
I love you to death,
I
girl.
love you to death. But yes, this has been wonderful. This has been a great show opportunity. Just having you here and just like with all of your knowledge, it's never enough time, because it's so much to unpack, especially when you dive into like just different cultures and behaviors. And we could be here until next week.
That's the truth.
But we are going to definitely put you back on the books for part 2.
That would be an honor. That'd be
Right, y'all. So I will be back next week. So make sure you are tapped in. Make sure you are subscribed to my YouTube. Check me out at She Evolves LLC.com. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for all that you do.
Thank
Thank you.
you. All right, bye, y'all.